My own son and his wife locked my sick wife and me in the basement of our old family estate. They screamed, "This house is ours now," sitting in that damp darkness. I whispered to Sarah, "Quiet. They do not know what is hiding behind that wall." When they finally left, I moved a loose brick and showed my wife the secret I had kept for 43 years. The truth about who I really am. A truth capable of destroying everything they think they know about our family. Hello, dear listeners. Thank you for joining me today. Before I begin my story, I would appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel, William's Revenge Stories, and told me in the comments which city or country you are listening from. It always excites me to know how far our stories travel. Enjoy the listening. I woke up at 5:30 in the morning, just as I have done for over 40 years. I did not need to look at the clock. My body already knows the time. Outside, the silence still had that thickness of the early morning. From the downtown square below the tolling of the bell tower broke the stillness, followed by the beating of pigeon wings on the old tile roof. I opened the window. The air of the historic district came in fresh, mixed with the sweet smell of jasmine climbing the balcony railing. The sky was beginning to lighten, and the wind brought with it the murmur of leaves from the orange tree in the patio. I heard the engine of a bicycle and then the sharp thud of the newspaper against the front steps. The Morning Gazette, like every day. I picked it up and left it next to the teapot on the wooden table that is older than my own son. I crossed the long hallway of old parquet, where the floorboards creak as if remembering every step we took in this house. On the wall, the photo of my wedding with Sarah hung crooked. The gold frame had already lost its shine. I straightened it carefully, caressing the foggy glass. In the living room, I lit the oil lamp that rests next to the small altar. I always have the feeling that as long as the flame is alive, so is the house. Then I went to the kitchen. The sound of the gas lighting, the smell of toasted bread, the soft boiling of water. Everything was part of my routine, of the small world I can still control. I cut the bread, beat the eggs, and prepared Sarah's breakfast, like every morning. Before serving, I opened the medicine box that Dr. Evans gave me and counted the pills, one by one, with the precision of a watchmaker. From upstairs, I heard footsteps, thin heels hitting the hallway floor. It was Linda. She always got up later, but today her walk sounded determined, almost impatient. A strong smell of expensive perfume began to fill the house. Too much for a morning. I put the breakfast tray on the table and looked toward the window. Sarah was already awake, sitting in her armchair by the white curtain, wrapped in her wool shawl. Her skin was pale but serene, reflecting the soft light of dawn. When she saw me, she smiled weakly. "Good morning, my love," I said, approaching her. I gave her the first spoonful of warm oatmeal and then a sip of tea. She squeezed my hand, and that small pressure was worth more than any word. I opened the door so fresh air could enter. The scent of orange blossoms filled the room again. Then I heard the noise of a car engine. A gray Audi stopped in front of the iron gate. The sound of the door closing, the hurried steps, the voice of my son Daniel speaking loudly on the phone. "Yes, tell Jason to close the deal before Monday." "No. The risk does not matter. I want it signed." His tone was the same as always, impatient, authoritative. I went out to the porch. He hung up the call just before seeing me. He greeted me with a brief gesture and then leaned in to kiss his mother. He barely grazed her cheek. "Mom, you look better today," he said with that voice of someone speaking without really looking. Linda came down the stairs at that moment, still in a silk robe. She had a cup of coffee in her hand, and an expression of impatience painted on her face. "David," she called me from the hallway, using my first name instead of Dad. "The Wi-Fi is not working again. Can you check it?" I did not answer. I limited myself to nodding. I left the tray on the counter and went to the small office in the back where I keep my tools. The router was blinking weakly. I restarted it, and while I waited for the lights to turn back on, I heard Daniel and Linda laughing in the living room, talking about a dinner at a fancy downtown restaurant. I returned to the living room. Sarah had fallen asleep. Her breathing was calm. Linda, on the other hand, had taken the opportunity to remove the lace tablecloth from the table and replace it with a modern beige one that did not match anything else in the house. "It looks fresher this way, more current," she commented without looking at me. I just nodded and picked up the old tablecloth, folding it carefully, as if it still held some of the smell of happy days. At noon, Daniel arrived with takeout boxes. He did not want me to cook. "Dad, do not bother preparing anything anymore. This is more practical, and Mom needs to rest." I limited myself to serving the plates. I did not even taste a bite. While they ate, they talked about projects, about money, about investments in Chicago, and the house sounded foreign, as if they had left me out of their language. After lunch, I washed the dishes in silence. The warm water and soap were the only things that still obeyed me. In the afternoon, I went out to the garden. The sun fell softly on the branches of the orange tree. I watered the plants. I pruned the roses. I cut a few to place in the vase in Sarah's room. She has always liked roses. When I returned, she was drowsy with a slight smile. Linda was talking on a video call, showing her mother her new house under renovation. "Look, Mom, this will be my kitchen. And here the dining room. It is an antique gem, just like this house," she said between laughs. From her armchair, Sarah listened without saying a word. Her eyes were tired, but tender, following the movement of the screen, like someone looking at something far away. When the call ended, she looked at me and smiled with that sweetness that has not left her yet. "Do you want some tea, my love?" I asked her. She shook her head. I tucked her legs in and stayed there a moment, observing how the afternoon light filtered through the curtains, painting the room with a golden tone. At nightfall, I went down to the basement to look for a can of paint. I wanted to repair the hallway window. I turned on the old neon bulb. The air was cold and damp, and the smell of wood and dust made me cough. There were still the bottles of wine from Grandpa Ernest, covered in cobwebs. I ran my hand over one of them and read his name engraved on the label. Ernest Miller, 1978. I stood looking at the weak reflection of the light on the glass. The house kept his history, but the echo of new steps had changed it. It did not sound the same anymore. It did not smell the same. I turned off the light and went up the stairs slowly. Before closing the door, I looked once more at the dark basement and said almost without a voice, "This house still breathes, but no longer with our breath." I stood there a moment, hearing only the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Then I returned to Sarah's room. She slept peacefully, and the lamp next to her bed cast a warm light on her face. I sat next to her, took her hand, and thought that although the world insisted on moving forward, without looking back, I still belonged to this house, to its silence, to the good ghosts that still inhabit it. And so my day ended, just like so many others, with a heart full of love and a sadness that does not go away, but that I have learned to accept, like someone who learns to live with the constant sound of an old house that little by little is emptying of voices. That day dawned with a fine rain, almost invisible, the kind that seems to float in the air rather than fall. I woke up before dawn. The sound of water gently hitting the windows was hypnotic. I stayed lying down for a few seconds, looking at the ceiling, listening to the wind pushing the orange tree branches against the glass. The air was humid and cold. The room smelled of old wood and medicine. I turned on the small lamp on the nightstand. The yellow light barely illuminated the wedding portrait hanging in front of the bed. I sat up slowly, put on my shoes and coat, and went out into the hallway. The floorboards creaked under my feet. That familiar sound that in other times would have made me smile, but now only reminded me that the house was filling with foreign steps. Passing by Daniel's room, the door was open. Inside, the blue glow of a screen flickered in the darkness. The sound of a female voice came from the phone speaker, some radio host talking about fashion and celebrities. Linda was awake, lying on the bed with her hair loose and headphones hanging from her neck. She had a white facial mask on and her mobile in her hand. The room smelled of expensive perfume and nail polish. I continued straight to the kitchen. There, the air was different, denser, more mine. I turned on the stove, put water to heat, and began to prepare breakfast. Black coffee for me, oatmeal with honey for Sarah, and a soft-boiled egg with a piece of toast. Everything with the same order as always. When the coffee began to release its bitter aroma, I heard footsteps approaching. It was Linda. She wore a cream-colored silk robe, her hair tied back, her arms crossed over her chest. She leaned on the doorframe and wrinkled her nose. "That smell of butter again," she said with a tone between mockery and contempt. "It smells like an old hospital." I did not answer her. I just flipped the egg with the spatula and let the sound of the oil cover the silence. She sighed, went to the window, and opened it abruptly. The cold air entered immediately, and with it the murmur of rain falling on the patio tiles. Then she took a small bottle from her robe and sprayed the room with perfume. Chanel, without a doubt, a strong dry scent, almost metallic. It drowned out the smell of food. "That is better," she murmured, taking out her phone to take a picture of the breakfast on the counter. "Morning vibes," she added while typing on her screen. I could see her focusing on the cup, the bread, and her own hand holding the fork. She took 3 photos, changed a filter, and uploaded it to her social media, smiling alone in front of the microwave reflection. At that moment, Daniel entered already dressed for work, his white shirt perfectly ironed, his new watch shining under the light. "Dad, are you taking care of the garden today?" he asked without looking directly at me. I called a gardener, but he canceled. "Do not worry," I answered. "I will handle it." He nodded distractedly, looking at his watch. Linda brought him a cup of coffee and smoothed the lapel of his jacket. "Do not forget the meeting with the investors from Chicago," she reminded him. "I know," he answered, giving her a quick kiss on the cheek. "By the way, the interior decorator is coming today. I want him to see the kitchen." I stopped the movement of the pitcher for an instant while serving coffee. Decorator, kitchen, words that weighed on me more than any other. During breakfast, they talked about changing the tiles, about painting the walls, about selling the old farm upstate. They said it as if they were talking about objects without history, without names, everything that had belonged to my father, everything that carried his fingerprint. When I finished serving, I prepared Sarah's tray. I went up the stairs slowly, taking care not to spill anything. She was awake, watching the rain from her armchair. I smiled at her. "I brought your coffee, my love," I said. I helped her sit up, held the cup while she took small sips. Then I gave her the medicine, cleaned her hands with a damp towel, and opened the window so fresh air could enter. She closed her eyes a moment, breathed deep, and said in a low voice, "That girl does not look you in the eyes." I did not know what to tell her. I only answered, "Rest, my love." By mid-morning, the sound of laughter and new voices filled the house. I went down and found Linda in the living room with 3 young women, all with light dresses and mobile phones in hand. "David," she said to me with a tone almost condescending. I invited some friends for lunch, nothing formal. On the table there were bottles of wine, small plates with appetizers, and a vase that did not belong to Sarah. One of the girls approached the window, took a photo, and said, "What a beautiful house. It is like an antique jewel." Another laughed. "Yes, the kind they use to make a period movie." I tried to remain polite. I served water. I offered bread. Meanwhile, Sarah was downstairs lying on the sofa, covering her eyes with her arm. The noise bothered her. The laughter continued for hours. Linda showed them the kitchen, the garden, the basement. I heard how she bragged. "We are renovating all of this. The house has charm but needs a modern touch." When they finally left, the silence fell again like a weight. I went to Sarah's room. She was asleep, exhausted. I tucked her in and went down to the patio. The sky was still gray and small drops accumulated on the orange tree leaves. In the afternoon, while I fixed the garden, I heard voices inside again. Linda had called a group of workers. They brought measuring tapes, paint catalogs, and a notebook. I entered just when one of them was measuring the living room window frame. "What are you doing?" I asked. Linda, with a flawless smile, answered, "We are going to change the curtains and maybe paint. The room needs more light. The walls are my father's," I told her slowly. "Grandpa Ernest painted them himself." She shrugged her shoulders. "Well, it is time to modernize them, right?" The sound of the pencil marking the wall pierced me like a nail. I said no more. I went to the hallway, took my coat, and went out to the patio. I stood in the rain for a few minutes, watching the water slide down the tiles. When I returned, the men had already left. The living room smelled of fresh dust and perfume. That night, Daniel came back with a bottle of expensive red wine. "Dad," he told me with a tense smile, "I will bring you a special vintage next time. I want to celebrate that the house will soon look brand new." I did not answer. I limited myself to sitting by the window. Outside, the drops hit the blinds. Inside, their laughter filled the dining room. I looked at the reflection of the wine in the glass and thought of my father, of how every brick of this house had been raised with his hands. Every crack had a story. Every point stain was a memory. And now all that was being erased layer by layer, as if memory could also be painted over. When I got up to turn off the hallway lights, I heard voices. They came from their room. The door was barely ajar. I stood still, not wanting to listen, but the words slipped out anyway. "Your father is a good man," Linda said in a whisper loaded with irony, "but he lives in another century. You will not notice when he is gone." The silence that followed was worse than any scream. I took a step back, closed my eyes a moment, and felt something inside me slowly turning off, like a candle that consumes itself without noise. I went back to my room. Sarah slept. Her breathing paused, her face calm. I sat next to her and caressed her shoulder. "Tomorrow I will make your coffee earlier," I told her, although I knew she did not hear me. I held her hand between mine. Outside, the church clock struck 12 bells. Each one resonated like an echo inside my chest. I looked toward the window. The rain continued falling, constant, silent, erasing the traces of the day. And then I knew. Starting tomorrow, nothing would ever be the same again. Saturday dawned clear and warm with a friendly sun filtering through the dining room curtains. I got up early as always. The air smelled of damp earth after the rain of the night before. From the window I heard the song of sparrows and the distant rumble of an engine starting on the street. For an instant, the house seemed quiet, as if nothing was about to happen. While I prepared Sarah's tea, I heard Daniel's voice in the patio. He was talking on the phone, his tone firm, almost authoritarian. "Yes, tell Richard to close the deal today. No, I do not care about the price. I want it signed before Monday." His voice was the same one he used when he was a child and demanded a new toy. Only now he wore a suit and an expensive watch. I stood observing him from the window. He was wearing a white shirt, perfectly ironed, with the sleeves rolled up and the shine of the watch reflecting the sun. He walked from one side to the other with the mobile on his ear, gesturing with his free hand. On his face there was no trace left of the boy who one day played barefoot under this very orange tree. Linda appeared behind him, moving the garden dining table. She spread out a beige tablecloth, the kind that looks taken from a magazine. Seeing it, I realized she had put away Sarah's lace tablecloth, the one we used since we got married. "It matches the new walls better," she told Daniel while adjusting the corners of the tablecloth. I kept preparing the tea, but something inside me hardened. When Sarah began to wake up, I went to help her. I adjusted the pillows, put the tray on her legs, and caressed her hair. She smiled weakly. "Is it sunny?" she asked. "Yes, my love. A clean sun, the kind that deceives," I answered her. While I gave her the medicine, I heard Daniel's steps entering the kitchen. He brought a smile so rehearsed that it scared me. "Dad, can you come to the dining room for a moment? We have something to talk about." I left the tray aside and asked Sarah to rest. I went down the stairs slowly, with a heavy heart, without knowing why. The dining room was brighter than usual. The open windows let in the breeze, which made the new curtains wave. In the center of the table was a brown leather folder, perfectly aligned with 2 glasses of white wine. Linda smiled at me with that fake sweetness she only uses when planning something. "It is just a toast, David," she said, pouring me a little wine. "Nothing to worry about." I sat down without touching the glass. Daniel settled in front of me, crossed his hands on the table, and adopted the tone of someone about to close a deal. "Dad," he began, "we have been reviewing some legal matters of the house." He opened the folder carefully as if revealing a delicate secret. He took out several documents with red stamps and signatures I did not recognize. On the first sheet, I read, "Transfer of property, Miller family residence. We do not want problems when the time comes." He continued, "If you sign this, everything will be easier for everyone." I looked up. "And what time is that exactly?" Daniel avoided my gaze. Linda intervened immediately, resting her hand on the papers. "It is just a formality. This way we avoid taxes, complicated inheritances, lawyers. You know how bureaucracy is." "I know," I said slowly, "but I do not understand why such a rush." "Why," Daniel answered with contained impatience, "this house needs a clear direction. You're tired, Dad. We can take care of it." "I am not tired," I answered him. "Just old," which is not the same. Linda let out a brief, uncomfortable laugh. "Oh, David, do not take it that way. It is for your own good. We want you and Sarah to be calm." Then I saw the pen placed right on top of the papers. The detail froze my blood. Everything was already planned: sign, toast, smile for the photo, and then disappear. I put my hand on the folder without opening it. "No," I said. The silence that followed was thick, as if the air had stopped. "What do you mean?" "No," Linda asked, frowning. "We just want to help you." "I'm not signing anything. This house is still mine." Daniel leaned his elbows on the table, leaning towards me. "Dad, we live here. We pay bills. We take care of Mom. It is logical. You live under my roof," I answered him, "and I take care of my wife, just as I have always done." He leaned back in the chair, took a deep breath, and tapped the edge of the table with his fingers. "Be reasonable. Mom needs professional attention. I already found a place at Oakwood Senior, living on the outskirts of the city. It is a good place." For a second I did not understand. "What are you saying?" Linda quickly added. "A center with doctors 24 hours a day, gardens, private rooms. You could visit her on weekends." I stared at her. The wine in her glass reflected the sunlight like an open wound. "You want to lock your mother in a facility?" Daniel looked down. "It is not locking her up," he murmured. "It is moving forward." At that moment, from the room next door, the slight clinking of a spoon hitting a cup was heard. It was Sarah. Her way of saying, "I hear you." I got up slowly. "We will not speak of this again," I said. Daniel tried to stop me. "Dad, do not get like this." But I had already turned around. I crossed the hallway without looking back. In my room, the air was cooler. I closed the door and leaned against it. I could hear my own heartbeat in the silence. The image of my son handing me those papers would not leave my head. The same son I taught to walk, the one I took to school in the rain, now looked at me like a nuisance. That night, the house filled with whispers again. From my bed with the door ajar, I heard the voices of Daniel and Linda in the living room. "Your father understands nothing," she was saying. "If he does not want to sign, we will have to do it our way." "Yes, but it must look voluntary." "I do not want trouble," he answered. Their steps echoed in the hallway, and then silence. I got up, went to the window, and opened it. The night wind entered, smelling of humidity and orange blossoms. In the distance, the bell tower struck 11. I stood there, breathing deep, feeling the weight of the air. I knew something had broken forever. The next morning, the dining room was empty. The documents remained on the table, but I noticed pages were missing. When I asked, Linda smiled with that courtesy that cuts deeper than a razor. "Relax, we put them away so they do not get stained." The mail arrived shortly after. The postman handed me a sealed envelope with the letterhead of a local notary. I observed it for a few seconds. I felt it weighed too much to be just paper. I did not open it. I kept it in the drawer of the sideboard and said nothing to Sarah. The rest of the day passed in silence. I did my usual chores, watering plants, washing dishes, adjusting the living room clock. Everything with an apparent calm that barely hid the storm inside. At night, when I turned off the hallway lights, I noticed a faint glow coming from the office. I approached in silence. The door was ajar. Inside, Daniel was in front of the copier stacking documents. Linda reviewed the sheets against the light, comparing signatures on her computer screen. "This one does not look alike," she said. "Make it identical. No one will notice," he answered. I stood still, breathing slowly with my hand resting on the doorframe. I felt the cold of the wood under my fingers. I did not want to enter. I did not want to interrupt them. I wanted to see them as they were, without masks. When they finished, they turned off the light and went up the stairs laughing as if nothing happened. I stayed there alone in the dark. The hallway lamp cast a long shadow of me on the floor. I looked at my hands. They were trembling, but not from fear. I closed my eyes. In the distance, the living room clock struck midnight. Each chime sounded louder than the last. The house, my house, seemed to be watching me. And for the first time in 40 years, I had the certainty that the danger did not come from outside, but from inside. From that moment, I swore one thing. If they had started a game, I would be the first to learn the rules. The sun entered violently that morning, filtering through the curtains like knives of light. The house was too silent. Not the radio, not the ticking of the clock, not even the song of the birds in the patio. Only the slow hum of the ceiling fan spinning lazily over the living room. Linda left early. She wore dark glasses and a purse hanging from her arm. Before closing the doors, she said without looking at me, "I'm going to buy flowers to decorate. This house needs life." She did not wait for an answer. The slam sounded hollow, and then the echo of her heels was lost down the street. I prepared Sarah's breakfast in silence. Soft eggs, toast, the herbal tea that relieved her cough. I helped her up, adjusted the shawl over her shoulders, and took her to the porch. The air was hot, loaded with the smell of orange blossoms. She closed her eyes a moment, enjoying the sun on her skin. "It is hot," she murmured. "Too much." I answered, fanning her with an old newspaper. When I returned to the kitchen, I found Daniel leaning on the doorframe. He had a cup of coffee in his hand, his face tense, sleeves rolled up to the elbows. He watched me with that mixture of condescension and annoyance that I found unbearable. "Dad," he said with a low but firm voice, "we have to talk again, and this time I want you to listen to me." I did not answer. I kept cleaning the table. The sound of the rag on the wood was my only response. Daniel took a step inside, placed the cup with force on the counter. Some coffee spilled and stained the tablecloth. "You cannot keep living in the past," he added. "Mom needs care that you cannot give her." I breathed slowly without looking up. "You already said that yesterday," I murmured. He let out an impatient sigh, and in his look there was something new, darker. "Come," he said suddenly. "Come down with me. I want to show you something." "What is happening?" I asked, although his tone admitted no answer. Before I could say anything else, he took me by the arm with force. His hand was firm, hard, and I felt how he pushed me toward the basement stairs. Daniel let me go. I tried to break free, but his grip only got stronger. "Just go down," he insisted. "It is important." We went down the wooden steps. The air became colder, with each step more humid. The smell of mold hit me like an ancient memory. The bulbs hung unlit, swaying slightly. When we reached the bottom, I took a step toward the wall to look for the switch, but before reaching it, Daniel pushed me hard. I tripped over a box and fell to the floor. The noise echoed in the low ceiling. "Daniel!" I screamed, trying to sit up. The door slammed shut. Then the metallic sound of the bolt turning. A dry, definitive click. I pounded the wood with my fists. "Daniel, open up. Listen to me." From the other side, his voice descended calm, almost indifferent. "This house is ours now, Dad. Rest a little." The steps moved away and then silence. My heart was beating hard. The darkness was dense, sharp. I searched for the switch on the wall and turned it on. The bulb flickered several times before dimly illuminating the space. What is happening? David Sarah's voice came from the stairs. She was there clinging to the handrail with a pale face. I ran to her. Calm down, my love. Everything is fine. Just a mistake. I helped her sit on one of the wooden steps. I took her hands. They were cold. I tried to push the door, but it did not move an inch. He locked us in. She whispered, barely audible. I did not answer. I sought to maintain calm. The basement was almost the same as I remembered from my youth. The stone walls with dampness, the smell of old wine and earth, the cobwebs in the corners. On the shelf, the antique bottles of Grandpa Ernest still rested, covered in dust. The yellowed label said, Reserve, 1975. I moved some boxes to make space and placed one on top of another, forming a kind of bench. Sit here. You will feel more comfortable. She obeyed, trembling. I'm going to look for water, I said. In a corner, I found an old plastic jug. It still had some liquid. I opened it and smelled. It was not entirely bad. I poured a little into a metal cup and offered it to her. Upstairs, the sound of the garage gate opening was heard. Then the car engine. Daniel and Linda were leaving. The silence that followed was absolute. They left us here on purpose, Sarah said, looking at me with wet eyes. Do not say that, please, I asked her. Not yet. We stayed there, listening to the small noises of the house, the creaking of pipes, the persistent dripping of some old pipe, the buzz of a trapped insect. Time became thick. An hour passed, maybe 2. The trembling light of the bulb seemed to breathe with us. I took my pocket knife and opened an old tin of sardines that was in a box. I divided the contents carefully. Sarah barely tasted a bite. Eat, I insisted. You will need strength. She shook her head. I'm not hungry. Please, I repeated and managed to get her to eat a little. The metallic taste of the fish filled my mouth. It was hard to swallow not because of the taste, but because of the rage. Later, while she slept, I began to walk slowly through the basement, observing every corner. The shadows danced with the flickering of the bulb. I saw a shelf full of old tools. I remembered being here with Grandpa Ernest many years ago when he taught me how to fix the garden irrigation system. Every man must know the heart of his house, he had told me. I opened a rusty iron cabinet. Inside were nails, a flashlight without batteries, a hammer, and a screwdriver. I put them in my pockets. The air smelled of dampness and old paint. Every breath hurt my throat. The wood creaked under my steps. I approached the back wall where the bottles were stacked. One of the walls had saltpeter stains and a crack that extended from top to bottom. I ran my fingers along it. It was cold, rough. I touched another section of the wall. It sounded different. Hollow. I tapped gently with the hammer handle. The echo was different, lighter. What are you doing? Sarah asked, waking up startled. Nothing, love. I'm just checking if air enters from somewhere. She nodded, lying back down. Her breathing was heavy. I turned on the old flashlight, and to my surprise, it still had a thread of light. I used it to inspect the wall better. There was a brick that protruded just a centimeter, as if it did not fit completely. I pressed it with my fingers. It moved a little. I did it again with more force. A dry sound, a slight crack. The brick came loose, leaving a dark hole behind. My heart jumped. I reached in. I touched something metallic, cold, rectangular. I pulled carefully and took it out. It was a box. An old Lucky Strike tobacco box. The metal was opaque with rust stains, but the brand engraved in relief could still be read. I stood looking at it for a few seconds, not understanding. The flashlight beam trembled on my hand. What is that? Sarah asked with a weak voice. I do not know. Something someone hid a long time ago. I sat on the floor next to her. The box was hermetically sealed, the edge sealed by time. I turned it in my fingers, noting its weight. It was not just a souvenir. It contained something. The basement air became heavier. I could hear my breathing mixed with the constant sound of water dripping. I rested the box on my knees and observed it in the yellow light of the bulb. The metal shone for an instant, as if returning a gaze from another time. Sarah looked at me, eyes half open. "David, what are you going to do? I do not know," I answered, but deep down I did know. I held the box with both hands as if it were something alive, and then I understood that although Daniel believed he had buried me in this basement, what he had actually done was open a door he could not imagine. The darkness no longer scared me, only the silence. Because now I knew that beneath the earth of this house, between its walls and its secrets, something waited to be discovered. I caressed the metal lid with my thumb. Sarah fell asleep, little by little, leaning on my shoulder. I turned off the flashlight, let the gloom wrap around us, and stayed listening to the rhythm of her breathing. In my hand, the cold box weighed more than the air. I held it against my chest and closed my eyes. I knew that everything, absolutely everything, had just begun. The yellow light of the basement bulb trembled as if breathing. The air was dense, saturated with humidity, and the sound of water dripping from an old pipe marked a slow, almost hypnotic rhythm. Every drop that fell on the cement floor seemed to count the seconds we had been there. I moved a couple of wooden boxes to the center to open up space. Doing so, a cloud of dust rose and made me cough. The smell of rotten wood, of old paint, of confinement covered everything. I felt a metallic taste in my mouth. "What time is it?" Sarah asked from the steps, her voice weak, loaded with fatigue. I took out my pocket watch, the one that had belonged to Grandpa Ernest, and looked at it. The hand was stopped at 9:15. The battery dead for years. I do not know, I answered her, but it must be noon. She sighed. Her breathing sounded like a soft whistle interrupted. I approached to cover her better with my jacket. The skin of her hands was cold. I took the flashlight I had found in the toolbox. I turned it on. The light flickered a couple of times before stabilizing. It did not shine much, but it was enough to distinguish the stone walls and old shelves. I walked slowly, checking the corners. On the right shelf were antique wine bottles. I touched one. The label said, Reserve 1978. Cleaning it with my sleeve, the name Ernest Miller appeared engraved on the cork like a signature from the past. I passed the flashlight over the back wall, the one on the west side, and then I saw it. A distinct line, a crack that ran through the joints between the bricks. There was something strange about that wall. I tapped gently with the hammer handle. The sound it returned was hollow, different from the rest. I felt my heart accelerate. Suddenly I remembered something, a distant image, almost a dream. Grandpa Ernest going down with me to the basement when I was about 14 years old. He carried his oil lamp in one hand and a tired smile. Here I kept something, David, he had told me with a deep voice. Something for desperate times. Back then I did not understand. I thought he spoke of money or wine. Now those words resonated with a new meaning, heavy urgent. I left the flashlight on the floor, shining toward the wall, and with the screwdriver I began to pry at the brick that seemed loosest. Dust fell in a cascade, filling the air with the smell of old earth. "What are you doing, David?" Sarah asked, trying to get up. "Nothing dangerous, love. Just checking something," I said without looking at her. The brick gave way little by little. I heard a slight creak and then a dry sound. Crack. The piece moved barely a centimeter. I tried again with more force. Finally, the brick slid outward, revealing a dark hole the size of a hand. The air that came out of there smelled of metal and old paper. I put my fingers in carefully. I touched something hard cold and took it out slowly. It was a Lucky Strike tobacco box, rusted with deformed corners. The surface was covered with a layer of gray dust, and the red color of the logo could barely be distinguished. I shook it gently. Inside, something jingled like coins or small, loose objects. "What did you find?" Sarah asked with a thread of voice. "I do not know," I answered, "but something important, for sure." I knelt on the floor, cleaned the lid with my sleeve, and tried to open it. It was stuck. I tried once more with my hands, but it did not yield. I looked for the screwdriver, placed it in the slot, and turned it carefully. A sharp click, and the lid opened. Inside was a package wrapped in waxed paper, yellowed by time, tied with a thin and frayed string. I untied it slowly. The knot came undone with a slight snap. Inside the wrapper, 3 folded sheets. I opened them carefully, the paper almost falling apart between my fingers. The first was a birth certificate. I read the name aloud, barely believing it. Mark Taylor, born June 12th, 1948. I froze. That date was mine. The second sheet was an adoption document with official seals and a clear signature. Ernest Miller. The text said that the minor Mark Taylor legally became adopted with a new name, David Miller. The third was a handwritten letter. The paper more worn than the others, but with the firm, slanted, unmistakable handwriting of Grandpa Ernest. If you are reading this, son, it is because necessity brought you here. The letters seemed to speak from the earth. I felt a knot in my throat. I took the sheets to the light of the bulb, spreading them on an empty box. Sarah approached, a little leaning on the railing. "What does it say?" she whispered. I cleared my throat. "Listen," and I began to read. "Your real name is Mark Taylor. You were born into a family that loved its country but was betrayed by it. Your father, William Taylor, was a government advisor falsely accused of conspiring against the regime. He died in prison to protect your mother and you. No one was supposed to know. I changed your name, son, so you could live without the shadow of the past. You are my son as much as you were his. But if one day you find this letter, remember the blood that runs through your veins has history, and you must not let anyone stain it." I finished reading. My voice trembled. The echo of my words bounced off the damp walls. Sarah was crying. "Your father, the real one?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "Yes." And Grandpa Ernest knew everything. I sat next to her. The metal box rested in my hands, cold as stone. I looked at it and felt that inside there was something more than papers. There was an invisible weight, that of a story buried for decades. I ran my fingers over the faded letters of Lucky Strike and thought of Grandpa Ernest, hiding this alone in this same basement, perhaps with the fear of being discovered. Silence took over the place again. Only the constant dripping of the pipe was heard, marking a time that seemed not to advance. Suddenly a noise upstairs, a dry thud like a door closing. I stood up instinctively. "Did you hear that I asked?" Sarah nodded, alarmed. "Yes." I turned off the flashlight and we were left in gloom. I listened attentively. Light steps, or maybe the wind. I was not sure. Outside, a car passed on the street, its engine moving away amidst the heat's hum. I approached the stairs, observing the slit of light coming from under the door. It did not move. No human sound. Only the distant echo of the neighborhood muffled by the thick walls. "Maybe it was the wind," I murmured. I returned to Sarah. I saw her weak, exhausted. I put the jacket over her shoulders and arranged it better. I kept the documents in the box carefully and closed it. The metallic sound of the lid snapping shut made me shiver. I stood looking at her for a long while, with my thumb brushing the rusty edge. That small box contained not only a family secret, but also a truth that could destroy whoever thought they had control. I felt a strange calm. I was no longer the same man who had gone down to that basement by accident. I looked up toward the closed door. I thought of Daniel and Linda up there believing their father was finished, defeated. They did not know that in the bowels of the house between the walls, they despised. I had just found something that could change everything. I took Sarah's hand. "There is something he does not know. Love. Something that can change everything," I whispered to her. She looked at me with tired tenderness, not fully understanding. I turned off the light. Only the thin strip of clarity filtering under the door remained. The box shone for an instant in my lap, reflecting that thread of light. The sound of dripping continued, marking time slow, relentless. And so under the earth of the Miller house, with the truth in my hands, I knew that my family's story the true one, was just beginning to resurface from the loose bricks of the past. Time stopped having shape in that basement. I did not know if it was day or night. The light of the bulb flickered every so often, and when it went out, the silence became so thick that I could hear the beating of my own heart. There was no clock, no sun rays, nor the distant sound of church bells, only the incessant dripping of the rusty pipe and Sarah's weak breathing. I stayed next to her, sitting on the floor, caressing her hair. Every time she breathed, her chest rose and fell with difficulty. She had started to tremble, so I covered her with my jacket and with an old rag I found inside a box. Suddenly I heard the familiar noise of tires on gravel. I sat up abruptly. Daniel and Linda had returned. The car engine stopped. The slam was heard then, their steps on the hallway floor. I put a finger on Sarah's lips. Silence, love. Do not say anything. She nodded, and her eyes filled with fear. Upstairs, the voices resonated, muffled by the thickness of the walls. If anyone asks, say they went down by accident. Daniel said, his tone cold, authoritarian. And if they do not believe it, Linda answered, we will say it was a misunderstanding. No one will come to check an old house. Their steps approached the basement. The door creaked, and a burst of white light descended the stairs, blinding me for an instant. Daniel appeared in the doorway, his tie undone, his face haggard, his eyes red. He carried a bottle of water in one hand and a small bag in the other. Have you thought about what you will do, Dad? He asked with a tired voice, but without a trace of compassion. I held his gaze. Your mother needs air and medicine, I answered him. He exhaled through his nose, frustrated. You always dramatize. He leaned in a little and threw the bottle and the bag toward the floor. There you go. Think about what suits you. Then he slammed the door shut. The sound of the bolt went down the walls like a metallic echo that pierced my chest. I knelt down and picked up the bottle. I opened it and brought it to Sarah's lips. Drink slowly, I told her, little by little. She drank carefully, closing her eyes. I wiped her mouth with a handkerchief and helped her lie back on the coat. For a few minutes only, the sound of water moving in the bottle was heard. Then she looked at me, eyes shining under the trembling light. David, she whispered. What was that you were reading last night? I took out the Lucky Strike box from the hole where I had hidden it. I placed it on my knees, opened it, and unfolded the papers with trembling hands. I spread the first one, the birth certificate, on my legs so she could see it. Her finger, thin and pale, slid over the letters. Mark Taylor. She read the name once, then another. She looked up at me. So you are not Grandpa Ernest's son? I shook my head slowly. No, not by blood. He adopted me. He saved me. But my true name was another, a name he wanted to protect. I took out the letter. The letters were almost erased in some parts, but I could distinguish them enough to read them aloud. The honor of a man is not destroyed by the accusation, but by the silence with which he accepts it. I said, letting Grandpa Ernest's words fill the damp air. Sarah closed her eyes. Her lips barely moved as if she were praying. Your true father, she said at last. Who was he, William Taylor? A man history erased. They accused him of being a traitor in 1952. But according to this letter, he died to protect his family. She looked at me for a long time. There was sadness, but also pride in her eyes. Then Daniel knows nothing. No, I answered her. And if he knew, his whole world would collapse. She nodded slowly. Why does he live off that last name? She murmured. Off Miller. Off a man who does not belong to him, as he believes. I remained silent. The words floated in the air like suspended dust. I leaned over the box again and noticed something I had overlooked before. A piece of folded paper at the bottom, smaller than the others. I took it out. It was a bank receipt, almost illegible, but I recognized the stamp. Central Bank. In the header, a name. Taylor Fund. The document indicated that the account was in the name of William Taylor, with inheritance rights transferred to his direct descendant, Mark Taylor Miller. I stared at those words again and again. This, I said in a low voice, this changes everything. Sarah watched me, not fully understanding. "What is it a proof?" I explained to her. "Grandpa Ernest kept this secret to protect me and to protect the inheritance my father left." She squeezed my hand. "What are you going to do? I still do not know. But now I have something they do not expect. The letter of a dead man and the power of a forgotten name." I wrapped the documents in the cloth again and kept them in the box. Then I looked for a deeper hole in the wall behind the old bottles. I took out 2 loose bricks and hid the box inside, covering it with dust and wood. "If they try to come down again, they must not see it," I said. Sarah nodded. Her breathing began to get shorter, as if the air cost her more. She coughed several times. I knelt next to her, rubbed her back, and gave her a little water. "Calm down, my love. Hold on a little longer." The ceiling bulb began to flicker and finally went out. Darkness fell suddenly dense, absolute. "Do not move," I told her, groping among the boxes until I found the toolbox. I touched a small power outlet on the wall with my fingers. I unscrewed the cover, peeled the cables with the knife, and joined them with a piece of old electrical tape. A spark, a snap, and the bulb turned on again, weak but constant. The basement recovered its yellowish light, and the reflection made the sweat on Sarah's forehead shine. Suddenly the sound of the lock vibrated above our heads. Someone was trying to open the door. "Daniel," I shouted. Silence. The noise of metal ceased. Steps. Then nothing. I stared at the door. Breath held. I felt a chill run through my entire body. Several seconds passed until the sound of footsteps faded. "They are going to come back," I said almost, without a voice. Sarah looked at me with eyes full of fear. "What are you going to do when they do?" "I will make them let me speak," I answered. "Speak about what?" "About who I really am, about what I carry in my veins." She took my hand tightly as if trying to anchor me to reality. "Be careful, David." "Oh, Mark, I do not know what to call you now." I smiled slightly, although I felt the knot in my throat. "Call me as always. The name does not change, says the love, Sarah. But it can change destiny." I helped her get up. We walked slowly to the stairs. We stayed on the last step, looking up. Through the crack under the door, a thin line of light extended over the stone floor. The air was still. I squeezed the box inside my jacket, making sure it was well hidden. The cold metal against my chest gave me back a sensation I thought forgotten, that of having a purpose. I looked toward the door, toward that small strip of light. I no longer felt fear. I felt calm. Calm and a determination that burned in my blood. Because for the first time in my entire life, I knew who I was. Not David Miller. Not the old, weak father his son locked up. My true name was Mark Taylor. And that truth, sooner or later, was going to tear down the walls of this house. The morning dawned gray, with a pale light filtering through the upper slit of the door. Dust particles floated suspended in the air, as if time itself had stopped inside that basement. The sound of an engine came from the patio, breaking the silence. I recognized the noise of wheels on gravel. "Daniel." The basement door opened with a long screech, and my son's silhouette appeared in the threshold, outlined by the brightness outside. He had his shirt rolled up and a tired face, but his tone had no trace of compassion. "Do not starve to death, old man," he said with a half-smile, throwing a paper bag and a bottle of water. "Think about it." The sound of the latch closing resonated on the walls like distant thunder. I waited a few seconds before moving. I took the bag and placed it on the worm-eaten wooden table. Inside was a piece of hard bread, a couple of slices of ham wrapped in wax paper, and a half-empty bottle of water. Sarah coughed weakly. I approached her, helped her sit, offered her water, and wiped her face with a damp cloth. Her skin was cold as porcelain. "Calm down, my love," I whispered. "It is almost over." When she lay back down, I took the Lucky Strike tobacco box from the inside pocket of my coat. I opened it just for an instant to make sure the papers were still there. Then I put it away again, hidden under the fabric. The car engine roared again. Through the floor, I felt the distant vibration when they moved away from the patio. The house remained in silence. I looked at the old clock hanging on the basement wall. It marked 11:12, just like the last time. It did not move. It seemed like a cruel irony to me. Time advanced upstairs, but down here it was stopped. I went to the corner where I remembered seeing the old telephone. A gray box attached to the wall, with a cut wire hanging like an open vein. I touched it. Dust and cobwebs. Useless. But then I remembered something. In the pocket of Sarah's jacket was still her old mobile phone. One of those with a sliding keyboard she used to call the doctor. I took it out carefully. The device was covered in dust, but still had some life. I pressed the power button. The screen flickered. One battery bar. Weak, but enough. I slid the keyboard and opened the contacts. Only 3 numbers saved. Dr. Evans, Daniel, and Robert Vance. The name Vance lit a memory. The lawyer who had worked with me years ago when I defended a family plot before the city council. A correct, discreet man. Someone I could still trust. I waited for Sarah to fall asleep. Her breathing became slower. Paused. Then I went up 2 steps, looking for a point where the signal was stronger. I lifted the phone toward the slit of light under the door. 1 bar of coverage. Only 1, but it was enough. I dialed Robert Vance's number. 1, 2, 3 rings, and then a female voice. Young, professional. Vance Law Firm. Good morning. I remained silent a few seconds before speaking, controlling the tremor in my voice. This is David Miller, I said in a low voice. Tell Mr. Vance I need to see him today. Matter of inheritance and fraud. Mr. Vance has an open appointment at 4 in the afternoon. She answered without hesitation. Confirmed, I whispered, and hung up before she could ask more questions. I turned off the screen, covering it with my palm to prevent the device's light from filtering under the door. I turned to Sarah, who was still sleeping. I knelt beside her. This afternoon we will get out of here, I promised her in a low voice. I swear to you. During the following hours, I dedicated myself to reviewing the plan in my head, again and again. The phone had little battery. I had to use it only at the precise moment. I took out the box and checked that the papers were complete. The certificate, the letter, the bank document. I wrapped them in a clean handkerchief and kept them inside my coat. The air became heavier as the day advanced. Heat rose from the floor mixed with the smell of dampness. Sarah slept, intermittently waking every so often with a start. Around 3 in the afternoon, the sound of the car broke the silence again. The squeak of the gate. The slam of doors. The basement lock moved. Daniel appeared again in the entrance with the same hard expression. Did you change your mind, Dad? He asked, going down a couple of steps. I feigned weakness, leaning against the wall. Your mother needs to see the doctor, I said with a tired voice. If she does not get out to the air, she will not make it. From upstairs, Linda's voice resonated with impatience. Let him go for a while. Just have him sign. Daniel hesitated a moment. Then he nodded. I will let you out, he said, opening the bolt. But no nonsense. 1 hour. I went up the steps, slowly helping Sarah. Every step made the wood creak. When the door opened completely, the daylight hit us in the eyes. I felt the fresh air on my face, and for an instant I felt dizzy. Daniel observed every movement, slowly. We are in no hurry, he said with that tone of false calm. We entered the living room. The smell of Linda's perfume floated in the air, mixed with that of recent dust. I went to the bedroom and took a clean jacket from the closet. I put the metal box in the inside pocket, making sure it remained hidden. Daniel followed me with his gaze. Call the doctor from my phone, he ordered. I want to hear it. I nodded. I took his mobile and dialed the number I remembered by heart. When they answered on the other side, I spoke with a paused voice, as if asking for a medical consultation. Doctor, I need an urgent appointment. I will bring my wife's documents. On the other side, Robert Vance's firm voice answered without hesitation. I will see you at 4, main office. I hung up. It is done, I said. The doctor is waiting for us. Daniel checked his watch. 1 hour. He repeated, lips tense. "And do not try anything, Dad." I nodded without arguing. Carefully, I helped Sarah go out. The main door was open. The afternoon sun fell on the patio, illuminating the orange tree leaves. A breath of wind brought the scent of jasmine from the fence. For an instant, everything seemed normal, almost beautiful. We crossed the threshold. My knees trembled from tension, but I did not stop. As soon as we reached the corner of St. Raphael Street, I raised my hand. A yellow taxi braked with a slight screech. I opened the door, helped Sarah sit, and gave the address in a low voice to the driver. The Vance Building, Main Street. The man nodded, started the engine. Daniel stayed at the door of the house, watching us. He did not move. He said nothing. He just raised a finger and looked at his watch, as if reminding me of the time limit. 1 hour, Dad. Not a minute more. I nodded and closed the taxi door. The vehicle started slowly advancing through the narrow streets of the neighborhood. Inside, the air smelled of gasoline and old leather. Sarah looked at me, face pale, but with a spark of hope. "Where are we going?" she asked. "To see the doctor," I said first, and then added in a lower voice, "to someone who can help us." She squeezed my hand tightly. Outside, the city extended under the golden light of the afternoon. Balconies with hanging clothes, children playing on the sidewalks, the sound of a street vendor in the distance. Everything seemed so normal that it hurt to think about what we were leaving behind. While the taxi turned toward Main Avenue, I discreetly took out the Lucky Strike box from my pocket and looked at it for a second. The cold metal returned a weak reflection, almost imperceptible. I held it on my knees and thought of Grandpa Ernest, of William Taylor, of the two men who in some way had built me. I had spent my life believing that the secrets of the past were buried forever, but now I knew that truth is not buried. It only waits. The taxi driver turned on the radio. An old song played, the kind Sarah used to hum while cooking. She recognized it and smiled barely with dry lips. "Years since I heard it," she murmured. I also smiled. For the first time in a long time, I felt destiny giving me a second chance. While the sun reflected on the downtown buildings, the taxi continued its way. The city advanced around us indifferent, but in my chest something woke up, a mixture of calm and resolution. I squeezed Sarah's hand, looked forward, and knew with absolute certainty that that call, made from the darkness of a basement, had changed everything. Freedom finally had a shape, and it was taking me straight to it. It was 3:50 in the afternoon when the taxi stopped in front of the stone building. On the facade, a bronze plaque reflected the sunset sun. Vance and Associates, attorneys at law. The shine blinded me for a second. I felt that every step I took, getting out of the car, weighed double. I helped Sarah descend. The driver looked at us through the rearview mirror, curious, but asked nothing. I paid the fare, closed the door, and we headed toward the entrance. The hallway floor was covered with antique tiles, and every step we took resonated with a soft echo, almost solemn. Inside, the smell of waxed wood and old paper hit me immediately. That mixture reminded me of Grandpa Ernest's office, where everything had a perfect order, and time seemed to advance with respect. The young secretary, with a neat bun and a kind smile, recognized us instantly. "Mr. Miller, Lawyer Vance is expecting you," she said, getting up from her seat. I nodded without a word. I had no strength to speak. Sarah advanced slowly, leaning on my arm, her gray scarf wrapping her neck. Vance's office was at the end of the hallway. The door ajar let out the distant murmur of Main Street. We entered. The lawyer stood up as soon as he saw us. "I knew I would see you again, Mr. Miller," he said with a warm tone. "What happened?" His voice was serene, but his eyes perceived my tension. I sat in front of his desk, and without a word, placed the Lucky Strike tobacco box on the wood. The rusty metal jingled softly. "Here is everything," I said, opening the lid carefully. Inside, the papers I had guarded for decades. The birth certificate with the name Mark Taylor, the adoption certificate signed by Ernest Miller, the handwritten letter, and the bank document of the Taylor Fund. Vance adjusted his glasses, extended each sheet with precision, and examined them under the light. His expression went from curiosity to astonishment. "This," he murmured, "changes everything." He ran his fingers over the letter, read some fragments, and looked up at me. "Does your son Daniel know this?" I denied firmly. "No, and he must not." Vance remained silent for a few seconds. Then he took a notebook, wrote something with fast handwriting, and called his secretary through the intercom. "Laura, prepare an eviction order for document fraud, and ask the notary for a signature verification, high priority." While he spoke, his tone became more technical, colder. But beneath that professionalism was a contained flame, a silent indignation. When he hung up, he looked at me again. "I need you to sign a power of attorney to represent you. This will not be just a family matter, Mr. Miller. It is a case of forgery and asset fraud." I nodded, trembling a little. I took the pen he offered and signed with a steady hand. David Miller. Or perhaps Mark Taylor. It no longer mattered which. Meanwhile, the secretary entered with 2 cups of tea. Sarah took hers with both hands. The ginger aroma filled the room, and her gaze got lost in the bookshelves, where names of laws and sentences accumulated like silent witnesses of other battles. When everything was ready, Vance closed the folder and tapped it gently on the table. "You will have a visit at your house in 24 hours, he said calmly. "Stay calm. Do not confront your son. Leave him to me." I pressed my lips together and nodded. I had no words. Only gratitude. Upon leaving, the afternoon air seemed fresher. I stopped another taxi, helped Sarah up, and we returned toward the historic district. The car clock marked 6:15. The sun began to fall, dyeing the facades a melancholic golden color. And now Sarah asked, not looking away from the horizon, "Now we will wait," and I squeezed her hand. We arrived by the back street, the one with the dry bougainvilleas. I did not want Daniel to see us from the living room window. We entered through the patio door slowly without making noise. Inside, everything seemed calm. Linda was talking on the phone, loudly mentioning Miami Mom and the new decorator. Daniel was on the sofa watching the news, a glass of whiskey in his hand. I placed Sarah in her favorite armchair next to the window. "The doctor says she needs rest," I announced with a neutral voice. Daniel did not even look at me. "Fine," he said simply without looking away from the TV. During the night, I feigned normality. I prepared a light soup, turned off the lights early, but my head did not rest for a second. When dawn broke, the house was quieter than ever. Daniel left early in his gray suit, and Linda spent the morning surfing on her tablet, suspecting nothing. At 5 to 11, the doorbell rang. I looked at Sarah. She understood without words. I went to the door and looked through the side window. A dark car was parked in front of the gate. From it, Robert Vance got down, accompanied by a young assistant, with a brown leather folder. I opened the door calmly. "Come in, counselor," I said, holding the latch. Vance entered, greeted with courtesy, and his assistant followed, carrying documents. From upstairs, I heard the sound of fast steps. Daniel was coming down the stairs, adjusting his tie. "What is happening here?" he asked with a mixture of annoyance and surprise. Vance looked directly at him. "Legal notification," he said, extending a yellow envelope. "Eviction order and complaint for document forgery." Daniel snatched the envelope from his hands and opened it with fury. His eyes moved fast from one paragraph to another. The color left his face. "Fraud. What does this mean?" Linda appeared behind him, still in a robe with the phone in her hand. "This cannot be," she murmured. "There must be a mistake." Vance, impassive, adjusted his glasses. "The transfer you presented has the signature of a notary who died 2 years ago. Everything indicates a forgery." Furthermore, he paused, letting the tension grow. An investigation could be opened regarding your lineage and the source of the funds you used. An icy silence filled the room. I was standing next to Sarah, with my hand on her shoulder. She breathed with difficulty, but in her eyes was something resembling serenity. Daniel looked at me with a mixture of fear and rage. "You cannot do this to me. I am a Miller." Vance smiled barely. "Perhaps not," he answered. "If you prefer, I can make it public tomorrow." Linda stepped back. Her hand trembled while looking for her husband's. "Daniel, let's go," she whispered. He looked at her, not knowing what to say. Then he gritted his teeth, turned around, and went up the stairs. The slam of the door resonated like a shot. Vance and his assistant collected the folders and signed a minute on the dining table. "You have 30 days to vacate the property," he said. "But honestly, I doubt they will wait that long." I shook his hand. "Thank you, counselor." He nodded with that look of someone who understands he has just witnessed the end of something bigger than a contract. Sometimes justice arrives late, Mr. Miller, but it arrives. When they left, silence returned. A few minutes later, Daniel came out of his room with his face undone. "My clients, they will find out," he stammered, looking at nowhere. I did not answer. I walked to the window and opened the curtains. The midday light entered, warm, bathing the walls. That afternoon, I heard them making desperate calls. Voices rising and falling, arguments, sobs. Linda cried. Daniel hit something against the floor. At 11 at night, when the hallway clock struck the last chime, I heard the sound of the trunk closing. I leaned out the window. Their silhouettes moved under the streetlights. They put the suitcases in without looking at each other, without speaking. The car started. The wheels turned on the gravel, and the engine was lost among the empty streets. I closed the gate with my own hands. The metal creaked. Inside, the house remained silent. Only the soft hum of the wall clock and the aroma of orange blossoms entering from the garden. I turned off all the lights except one. The corner lamp next to Grandpa Ernest's portrait. The yellow light reflected on the glass, illuminating his stern, almost paternal face. I stood there a long while without moving, with my heart beating slowly. For the first time in many years, I felt the house breathed with me. And although outside the wind brought the sweet smell of the first ripe oranges, inside, the only thing heard was silence. A clean silence, as if all the false voices had gone forever. The next morning dawned with a soft, almost innocent light. The winter sun entered through the blinds, gilding the dust suspended in the air. It was a different silence, thick, as if the house was holding its breath. At 8:30, I heard the engine of a truck stop in front of the gate. The metallic clack of the handbrake startled me. I leaned out the window. 2 men dressed in blue jackets got out of the vehicle. They wore work gloves and hurried looks. They asked no questions. They entered, began to load suitcases, paintings, shoeboxes, bags of clothes, everything that had belonged to Daniel and Linda. Daniel watched them from the porch, arms crossed. He had a wrinkled shirt, a gaunt face sunk in dark circles. He did not look like the confident man who once spoke of inheritances and financial logic. Now he was barely a body, holding the weight of his own failure. Linda was by his side with a wide-brimmed hat and dark glasses. She spoke ceaselessly on the phone. Her voice cut the air like a blade. "Tell Mom we will arrive in Miami tonight," she said while checking a list on her mobile. I approached slowly, opening the wooden door that creaked, as if it also wanted to say goodbye. "Your mother is resting," I told him in a low voice. "Do not disturb her." Daniel looked up for just a second. His eyes stopped on me without words, without even resentment, only exhaustion. Then he tightened his grip on the suitcase handle and turned his face toward the patio. The men continued their mechanical work. The sound of boxes hitting the floor mixed with the song of sparrows. On the living room table, I left the envelope Robert Vance had sent early that morning, the notarial confirmation of legal property transfer. The court seal shone under the light. Daniel saw it but said nothing. He took a pen from his pocket and signed the copy that corresponded to him. His hand trembled slightly. A newspaper fell from his coat. The headline in large black letters occupied almost the entire cover. "Forgery Scandal. Rocks Miller Investments." He picked it up from the floor, read it twice, and his lower lip trembled. "Who leaked it?" he asked with a thread of voice almost childish. I looked at him, not raising my voice. "Truth travels fast, son. Faster than we imagine." Linda snorted, clutching her purse against her chest. We do not have to listen to this. Let's go. She turned to the workers. Fast, please. We do not have all day. From the fence I saw Mr. Arthur Harris, our neighbor. He was standing on the sidewalk with a sack of oranges in his hand and a magazine folded under his arm. He looked at me, nodded with a slight smile that needed no words. He understood. The truck started with a roar. The wheels crushed the gravel, leaving a trail of dust. The winter air smelled of metal and goodbye. Daniel got into the passenger seat. Linda settled next to him, and without looking back, the vehicle moved away, slowly until disappearing around the curve. When the gate closed again, the whole house exhaled. The silence that remained was so deep I could hear the hum of the ceiling fan and the ticking of the clock in the hallway. I stayed a moment looking at the tracks the tires had left on the ground, knowing the wind would erase them before nightfall. At noon, the phone rang. It was Robert Vance. The press has everything, he said with his professional tone. Their names were already removed from the board of directors. They will not be able to operate any account in their name. Thank you, counselor, I answered. I hung up slowly and went out to the patio. The air smelled of wet leaves and new flowers. The orange tree in the back had bloomed again. Between the branches, sun rays slipped through, filtering like promises. At 4, the postman appeared with an envelope from the central bank. I opened it right there with trembling hands. Inside was an official letter. Taylor Fund accounts reactivated. Holder, Mark Taylor Miller. I read my name 3 times. That name that had remained buried half a century. I signed the receipt, put the envelope away carefully, and took it to the small chest under the stairs, the same one that had belonged to Grandpa Ernest. I placed it there among old folders and forgotten keys. I closed with a click that sounded like justice served. The rest of the day passed slow, peaceful. At nightfall, Sarah woke up. The golden light of the sunset bathed her pale face. Did they leave? She asked with a thread of voice. I nodded. Yes, love. They left. She said nothing more. She just took my hand and gave me a slight smile. One of those that contain a whole life of silences and pardons. That night, I walked through the house. Every room was a memory. In Daniel's room, only shadows remained. An empty cologne bottle, a pair of rolled-up socks, and a photo frame face down. I lifted the frame. It was an old photo from when he turned 10. He smiled next to me and Sarah, holding his first bicycle. For an instant, I felt the old impulse to justify him, to believe there was still goodness behind his fall. But no. Sometimes a father's love consists of letting the son face the echo of his decisions. I covered the bed with a white sheet and closed the door. In the garden, the air brought the smell of jasmine. Arthur crossed the gate with his slow step and straw hat. The silence sounds better today, right, David? He said, lifting the basket of oranges. Yes, friend, much better, I answered. We sat on the porch, 2 old men under the shade, sharing tea without haste. We did not talk about justice or money, only about the weather, about the flowers returning, about the buzz of bees among the hedges. As night fell, the peace became denser, almost palpable. I felt for the first time in years that the house breathed with me again, not against me. When Arthur said goodbye, I walked through the hallways, turning off the lights one by one. I passed by the study where Daniel used to work. The chair was still turned as if someone had just gotten up. I touched the backrest with my fingertips. I continued to the basement. The door remained the same. The old lock. The slightly humid air. I went down the first steps. The gloom wrapped me like a memory. The hanging bulb was still there. I turned it on. Its yellowish light revealed the stains of time on the walls. I walked to the corner where the brick had come loose, that hole that guarded a past and returned the truth to me. I rested my hand on the rough surface of the wall. Thank you, old Ernest, I whispered. I closed my eyes. I could imagine his voice pause noble. When the day comes, do the right thing, even if it hurts. And I had done it. I went up slowly, turning off the light. In the distance, the church bells chimed 7 times. The sound arrived soft, like a blessing. Coming out to the garden, the sky was dyed violet. The wind moved the orange tree leaves, and the perfume of fresh blossoms filled the air. I breathed deep with a calm heart. The house was at peace. Sarah slept in the armchair blanket up to her neck with a serene face, and I, for the first time in a long time, felt that winter did not bring cold. It brought justice. It brought silence. It brought at last forgiveness. 6 months have passed since that night when the wind brought the smell of oranges, and silence returned to inhabit the house. The historic district has awakened again with spring, and with it a different rumor in the streets. I wake up every day at 6 as always. Custom remains stronger than rest. I open the windows and let the warm air enter, mixed with the aroma of blossoms blooming in the patio. From the corner the baker's heard shouting his offer, and the echo of horse hooves that still pull some delivery carts. The basement. That dark place where hopelessness locked me for days no longer exists as such. I transformed it with my own hands. Now it is a luminous study, with light wood floors and walls freshly painted white. The oval of the small window lets in the morning light and reflects it on the shelves, where I keep Grandpa Ernest's old notebooks, letters, and restored documents. Sometimes I stay there in silence, just listening to the creaking of the living house. Sarah says the place no longer breathes sadness, and she is right. She sits by the living room window, wrapped in her beige wool shawl, knitting a scarf with pale blue yarn. Her skin looks pinker, and although her movements are slow, her smile has returned to have that warmth I remembered from the first years in this house. I serve her a cup of chamomile tea, still steaming, and place it on the small table. "Thank you, David," she says without looking up from her work. "Today it smells like spring." "Yes, love," I answer, and peace. I sit in the wooden armchair across from her and open the newspaper. On page 3, almost hidden among economic news, a small note announces, "Daniel Miller and Linda Rivas sell their properties in Chicago. They disappear from the financial landscape." I make no gesture. I fold the newspaper carefully and leave it on the table. Sarah observes me in silence. I do not need to tell her anything. We both know that some stories close themselves, without applause, without noise. By mid-morning, Mr. Arthur Harris arrives. His cane taps gently on the porch floor before he pokes his head through the door. "Good morning, David. Today the garden gave fruit before my knees." He jokes, lifting a basket full of red tomatoes and fresh bread. We laugh. I invite him into the new study. His eyes widen, seeing the change. "Wow," he says, looking at the walls. "This no longer looks like a basement. It looks like another place." It is. I answer, serving 2 coffees. Everything changes when one decides to let the light in. Arthur leaves the cane on the wall and observes the shelves. "And those notebooks? Grandpa Ernest's?" I explain. "I thought I should keep them." In every page there is something of his voice, something not taught, only inherited. He smiles with understanding. We place an antique chessboard in the center of the table. The pieces are polished wood worn by years. "You start since you own the board," he says. We play several games. Sarah from her corner interrupts us every so often with a mischievous tone. "Arthur, no cheating, I know you." He raises his hands, laughing, feigning innocence. "Never, madam. I only move with strategy." The morning passes between laughter, the noise of pieces clashing, and the song of sparrows entering through the open window. At noon we go out to the garden. The sun falls soft on the new leaves of the orange tree. The air smells of sap and fresh earth. Arthur and I prune the lower branches, while bees buzz around, committed to their work. On one of the high branches there's a small nest with 3 chicks barely visible. I stop to look at them. "Life always returns," I say without looking away. Arthur nods, wiping sweat with the back of his hand. "And sometimes quieter, but cleaner," he adds. We stay quiet for a while, listening to the murmur of the city in the distance. In the afternoon, the sky covers with fine clouds, and it begins to rain. A calm rain, the kind that does not scare, but washes. I help Sarah close the hallway windows and we light the corner lamp. The smell of wax mixed with the aroma of rain dampening the earth enters through the cracks. The sound of drops against the roof is a lullaby. I go to the study cabinet and take out the old Lucky Strike tobacco box. I've cleaned and polished it. Now it shines with its corners still dented but dignified. I place it on the main shelf among the books. Sarah looks up from her knitting. "You still keep it?" she asks with a mixture of tenderness and curiosity. "Yes," I answer, "it is part of our history, and of the truth that is not erased." She nods without stopping smiling. At 7 o'clock sharp, the hallway clock chimes. I turn on the desk lamp, take a sheet of paper, and write a single sentence. Blood can betray, but truth does not age. The ink spreads slowly. I blow to dry it close to the notebook and keep it with the others. I go out to the porch. The rain has ceased, but the streets still shine with golden reflections from the streetlights. The historic district smells of hot-bred humidity and life that does not give up. On the corner, a group of young people plays the guitar under a bar awning. The notes rise up the street like a joyful sigh. From inside, I see Sarah through the glass. Her face, illuminated by the lamp, has the serenity of someone who no longer fears anything. She smiles, and in that smile is everything I have lost and everything I still keep. Arthur passes in front of the gate, raising his hand. "Until tomorrow, old friend," he shouts between laughs. "There will be sun tomorrow." I answer. I close the door. I walk through the house, turning off the lights one by one. I only leave the study one on illuminating the white walls, where before there was only dampness and fear. The rain left a clean shine on the wooden floor. I sit at the desk, look around, and think that everything, even pain, has its place if given time and silence. I rest my hand on the tobacco box, that relic that changed my destiny. There is no rage nor nostalgia, only gratitude. I murmur to myself as if speaking with Grandpa Ernest, with my true father, with all those who once taught me something without words. The true legacy was not the money nor the last name, but the dignity of not giving up. I look out the window. The city lights flicker under the clear sky. The wind drags the orange blossom perfume flooding the study. The Miller house, which one day was a prison today, breathes in calm. And in that calm, in that silence that no longer hurts, I finally find what I always sought: peace of heart. I have learned that blood does not always define family, but loyalty does. For a long time, I believed a father's love could withstand everything, even betrayal. And perhaps it is true, but I also understood that love without respect becomes a chain, and sometimes you have to let children face the weight of their decisions so they understand the value of what they lost. I forgave not for them, but for me, because bitterness ages the soul more than years, and forgiveness cleans the house of the heart. Today I look at Sarah and give thanks. Thanks for still being here, for reminding me that dignity is never negotiated, and that even in the darkness of a basement, truth can be the light that saves you. I wish every family listening to this story finds peace before pride, understanding before distance, and love before resentment. May everyone's home be filled with respect, patience, and second chances. And may God bless those who love without expecting anything in return.